I'll get mic'd up when I go sit down. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. We have quite an event for you this evening, so we're going to get right down to business. There's still a few chairs in the middle. I see a few open spots, so please do have a seat. We'll be here, have a great panel and discussion for you this evening, so I want to make sure that you're comfortable. There's some additional seats over on this side as well. So my name is Anna Siefken, and I'm with the Carnegie Mellon University Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. We're very glad to have you here this evening. Many of you may or may not have been on campus or on this part of the campus before, so we're very glad to have you. I'm going to give you a little overview of this evening. We actually are going to talk for a few minutes about the Scott Institute, tell you a little bit more about our background and our history. Then Dr. Weber will give a keynote address, followed by sort of a panel response with some of our local leadership, as well as some national leadership. So with that, I'd like to actually welcome Dr. Jared Cohen to say a few words on behalf of the University and Scott Institute.
Thank you very much, Anna, and welcome all. We're delighted to have you here for this very exciting event. The Scott Institute for Energy was founded about 5 years ago as a result of two major gifts, one from Sherman and Joyce Scott, two alumni, and one from the Richard King Mellon Foundation. That allowed us to get going, and we've launched several programs, which Anna will tell you about. What I wanted to emphasize for you is that it is a university-wide institute, and recognizing the special character of Carnegie Mellon as such a collaborative place where we don't worry very much about departmental or school lines. We see the institute as working through the departments, putting our resources in the faculty and letting the collaborations work out in a natural way. And so far, that's worked very well. We feel like the Scott Institute is just ending its startup phase. And now, over the next several years, you'll see some really wonderful things happening. We're already strong in this field with many, many faculty. We estimate more than 100 working in it. But we could be stronger and better and have even bigger impact. And that's what this institute is about. This day, this event, but also what's happened earlier today, all happened because of Anna. She went to Austin. I guess we should be careful about where we let our colleagues go. Austin, Texas, where she heard Michael Weber speak and came back raving about him. And having spent a few minutes with him before this event, I can see why. And then she made contacts with Itron. And we're delighted that Phil Measy, its CEO, is not only here, but he gave a wonderful talk today at the lunch hour, and made contacts with Duquesne Light, with Peoples Gas, with the City of Pittsburgh, and Allegheny County. This panel that we're going to have in a moment, if you look at it, it's got 5 CEOs. How often do you get CEOs actually to show up? The heads of these organizations to show up and give us so much time. I'm looking forward to the panel. But more than anything, I want to congratulate Anna for conceiving of this, of doing such a great job pulling it off, and it's going to be great. Thank you all for being here and for being part of it.
Thank you very much, Jerry, for your kind words. And I do want to say a quick thank you to all of you. I know that some of you traveled far and wide to be here, so really appreciate having you here. The Scott Institute, as Dr. Cohen mentioned, we work across the academic units. So we have about 130 faculty affiliates that work on research and projects, deploying of real-time projects that are very specifically on energy. We have researched these strategic partnerships. We do a lot of policy and outreach, as well as education. We're usually, you'll find us in Scott Hall, which is the brand new glass building built on the other side of campus, which actually has one of the cleanest clean rooms in the country and also one of the most energy efficient among its attributes. The Scott Institute, there are 6 of us. I'm going to start with 4. So there's Jared Cohen, who you've already met, Andy Gelman, who's also with us, Debbie Stein as well, who does policy outreach, and myself. And we actually we have a set of strategic priorities around finding and creating new materials, optimizing smart grid technologies, really looking at data, predictive analytics, and looking at building a pathway to a low-carbon future. So part of our planning is really around making sure that we're maximizing opportunities, particularly with the startup ecosystem that's in Pittsburgh. So we focus on research, these partnerships, commercialization, education, and outreach. So speaking of outreach and education, you are at such an event. We have 2 additional events that are coming up. We actually have Stacy Olson, who's the president of Chevron Appalachia, who'll be speaking on campus, and that is actually on March the 7th at lunch. We also have Val Jensen, who works with ComEd out of Chicago, who will be talking about the future of utilities, and that's on April the 5th. And when we talk about really big events that we do, we have Energy Week, which is actually March the 27th through the 31st, so please plan ahead. We have some incredible speakers that are coming in to really continue the conversation. We do have partnership opportunities available for that event, so many of you might be interested in those as well. A special thanks this evening to our sponsors. So we have Itron, Peoples Natural Gas, the City of Pittsburgh, and Duquesne Light. And very specifically, I'd like to thank our working group, which was Bob Borzillo, Angela Lockwood, Callie Bendixson, Grant Irvin, Rebecca Kiernan, and Sarah Yeager from the city, Ben Morris and Jessica Rock from Duquesne Light, Barry Kukovich from Peoples Natural Gas, and the whole PR team and communications team here at CMU, including Abby Simmons and Sophie Elias. We also had a number of local partners, which might be how you heard about this event. So these are folks that are working on this topic day in and day out in Pittsburgh, so doing some very incredible work, and many of you are heavily involved with those organizations. A special thanks also to our panelists. We'll be introducing them in a few minutes as they come on stage. That will be after the keynote. But I did want you to see again that we have quite a lineup for you. And I do want to give special thanks to 2 individuals, Amanda King and Virginia Delaney, who were instrumental in getting this event together today. So again, I'm Anna Siefken. I hope that you contact me. If we have not met already, please grab me, and I'd love to talk with you about ways to get involved with Carnegie Mellon. So with that, I'll be introducing Sherilyn Moore. She's the Vice President of Global Marketing and Public Affairs for Itron. Sherilyn has more than 20 years of experience in energy and technology sectors. She's been instrumental in driving global marketing strategies for technology, software, and services tailored to the utility industry. In 2013, she was named Vice President of Corporate Marketing and Public Affairs. And so in this role, she's responsible for the company's global marketing and public affair activities, including providing strategic direction for internal and external communications, leading external affairs, including public relations, community investment, and government relations. So she speaks and she writes at events all over the country, and we're very glad to have her here. Thank you, Sherilyn.
Thank you.
Of course. So just that when you're ready.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Here at Itron, we're thrilled to be part of the event and excited to sponsor, certainly. It's with a great honor that I get to introduce our keynote speaker tonight. At Itron, we've been partnering with Dr. Weber for quite a few years now, and we really found that our mission, our deep commitment to the delivery and use of energy water, very closely aligned to much of his work in really pioneering the understanding and the communication around the energy and water nexus. So it's with great honor that we continue our partnership and connecting, and much like we align with Dr. Michael Weber and his work and the Weber Energy Institute, it aligns very closely to the Scott Institute. So we've enjoyed our time and look forward to connecting even more with CMU and the Scott Institute with our combined visions. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michael. Michael is a Deputy Director of the Energy Institute, Jose Centennial Fellow in Energy Resources, the co-director of the Clean Energy Incubator at the Austin Technology Incubator, and professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Texas, Austin, where he trains a new generation of energy leaders through research and education at the intersection of engineering, policy, and commercialization. He's authored more than 300 scientific articles, columns, books, and book chapters, including op-eds in the New York Times and features in the Scientific American. And that isn't all, but I decided to condense the bio. So with that, please welcome Dr. Michael Weber.
It's good to be here. Appreciate so many people coming out this evening to talk about energy and water. I've got to admit, I'm very nervous. I don't typically get nervous because I'm a paid professional speaker. I do this as a living for a professor, but I know in this room I might not be the smartest guy in the room, and that makes me a little bit nervous. We'll see how it goes. If I say anything incoherent, please forgive me. But I want to talk about energy and water and human survival based on a book I just wrote, the same title, Thirst for Power, Energy, Water, and Human Survival. And I wrote that book because energy and water are both critical to the things we care about. Water is life, and energy is wealth or quality of life. They give us all the things that let us live and have a good quality of life. When NASA goes look for life, they look for water. And this is a typical headline you might see on CNN. Liquid water exists on Mars, boosting hopes for life there, NASA says, right? So water is life. And we use water as not only an enabler for life, but a definition of society or civilization. In fact, in Pittsburgh is defined by water, right? You use water as a boundary, you use water as an enabler for your industry over the decades and over the centuries, defined by the different rivers. And I got some training today from my Uber driver on how to pronounce the rivers. I know it's Allegheny and Ohio River, and is it the Mon? People just call it the Mon for sure. I can get away for that. Monongahela or something, is that right? Is that close? And I was like, is it the Monongahela River? And he's like, oh, don't say that in public. So anyway, I'm learning the river names, and it goes back for a long time. Here, they didn't even know how to spell Pittsburgh. That's sort of interesting. That was the old spelling, I guess. So Pittsburgh certainly is defined by water. Civilization is defined by water. Water is life. It can be even used to define our outlook on life. So if we look at a glass of water, an optimist might say the glass is half full, and the pessimist says the glass is half empty. The engineer says the glass is the wrong size. The water planner says it doesn't matter how long a straw is if a glass is empty, and my graduate students say, I see you found my tears, which I think is kind of funny. So water establishes how we look at life. And the good news is if water gives us life and water gives us society and water gives us civilization, the bad news is that a lack of water can cause a collapse of society. And books have been written about this, collapse, how societies choose to fail or succeed. And the great warming, climate change, and the rise and fall of civilization. Civilization can come and go. And oftentimes water scarcity or sustained drought over decades can be a cause for collapse. We've seen that with 3 of the 5 multi-century Chinese dynasties. We even see with the Roman Empire, where we learned as kids that it might have been the Vandals or the Lombards or the Visigoths who came in attacking the Roman Empire that caused its collapse. Or it might have been water scarcity at the fringes of the empire that pushed them in to cause them to ransack Rome and that kind of thing. The classic Maya collapse also tied to drought, and also the Khmer Empire in modern-day Cambodia. So a lot of civilizations collapse at a time coincident with drought, and it's hard not to think that drought was a part of that, or lack of effective water management or water scarcity was tied in. So water gives us civilization and gives us life, but lack of water takes away life and takes away civilization. This is the part of the talk where I'm trying to scare you into taking it very seriously. So we got to think about water in a sensible, mindful way. So water is life. Energy is wealth or quality life. Energy gives us clean water, productive industry, mobility. It gives us social mobility where we can get richer from energy, and it gives us physical mobility where we use energy to move ourselves around. Energy gives us comfortable building even when it's February in Pittsburgh, we're cozy inside, and it gives us abundant food. So energy is good. It enables these things we like. And if we look at this satellite imagery as this International Space Station is headed east over Southeast Asia, so north is to the left and south is to the right, and it's heading east, you see the Earth at night, and anywhere there's a light, there's someone who has access to wealth and electricity. And as it's coming up on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea is dark and South Korea is light, except for Pyongyang. So we could even take another level of interpretation, which is electricity, and the access to electricity, or the access to energy, is democratizing, that people who are free have access to energy, and people who aren't free don't have access to energy. So energy is very good. We like energy, but of course it has its crises. It's got its converging problems. We have concerns about resource depletion, running out of energy. We like it, the price, we like it. Environmental degradation, where something about the way we use energy overcomes the atmosphere or the land or the ocean's ability to take up the waste products, and also the national security implications of our energy trade, where something about the way we buy energy and who we buy it from undermines our foreign policy or geopolitical situation. Unfortunately, all these challenges reinforce each other and amplify. So energy is good, but energy is also tricky. So we have to manage that, and it's tied in there with water. So let's talk about energy and water. Well, I want to start by introducing you to Brick Smalley. Some of you in the room might have worked with him or know him, a brilliant thinker, a professor at Rice University who got a Nobel Prize for his work discovering buckyballs or Buckminster fullerene, a carbon-60 molecule shaped like a geodesic dome that allowed novel materials with new properties. It's really kind of amazing stuff. And he spent the last few years of his life, he died about 10 or 12 years ago, I think from leukemia, but he died and he spent the last years of his life talking about the 10 grand challenges of humanity. And he put them in order in a list. Energy number 1, water number 2, then food, environment, poverty, terrorism and war, disease, education, democracy, and population. His thinking was that there's a logic to this, there's a sequence to this, that if you can solve energy, and we get access to clean, sustainable, reliable, affordable energy, then we can solve our water problems, because then we can pump water thousands of miles or desalt the oceans or melt glaciers or whatever we want. And once you've solved your energy and water problems, you can solve your food problems. And once you solve your food problems, you can worry about protecting the environment, and then you can lift people out of poverty. Then you avoid terrorism or war if people aren't poor, and then you can go to disease and education, democracy. Democracy is number 9. You can't have democracy without an educated population, although I suggest we are testing that hypothesis right now as a society. And you can't have education if you're hungry. It's hard to learn if you're a kid and you're hungry, and you can't have food if you don't have energy and water. A lot of people will put water and food at the top, but food is actually below energy because we use energy to make our fertilizers and the diesel for the tractors and the plastic to wrap the food and then energy to cook the food, that kind of thing. So energy and water are fundamental. They're at the top of the list, and I'm pleased that he and I agree on this. So I suspect that perhaps I'll follow his path of pushing for these other levels of all 10 challenges. All right, so energy, water, number 1 and 2, but they're also interconnected. And this was where there might be a surprise for some people, that we use energy for water and we use water for energy, that they're interconnected in ways that is an opportunity, that if we have infinite energy, we have infinite water, and if we have infinite water, we have infinite energy. If we have all the water we need, we can grow biofuels in the deserts and dam up the rivers and that kind of thing. If we have all the energy we need, we can always have access to water. But we don't live in a world of infinite, we live in a world of resource limits and constraints, and that's the bad news, is a constraint in one becomes a constraint in the other. You get cross-cutting vulnerabilities. And then the good news is there are cross-cutting solutions. That's the general arc of my thinking and the general arc of the book as well, about how these things are tied together. And let me walk through and give you some examples. We use water for energy in a variety of ways. We use water to spin turbines at dams for hydropower. We use water to make steam, to spin steam turbines at steam electric plants, which is the most typical kind of power plant. We use water then to cool those power plants. We use water to grow biofuels, to extract oil and gas with things like water flooding or hydraulic fracturing, injecting water into the ground to increase our oil and gas production. We use water at mines to extract minerals and solid fuels like coal and uranium. And then we use water in the form of steam at refineries to upgrade or improve those fuels to gasoline to make them more useful. And then we use water to transport those fuels. Water is all up and down the supply chain of energy. And the good news is that water enables the energy. The bad news, if the water is not there the way we want it, then the energy supply chain gets crimped. And that's a challenge for us. And I'll give some examples of that a little later on. Let's go through a couple of fun facts on this. 1/3 of all the energy we consume in the nation goes just to boil water at power plants to make steam, to spin steam turbines, to make electricity. 1/3 of all the energy we consume in the nation is just to boil water. The last time I checked, boiling water is not a new technology. So this is like Roman-style stuff, right? We're boiling water. That's 1/3 of our energy. And that's because steam is a powerful mover for these turbines. It gives us a lot of power. Most of the power in the world is from steam cycles and steam power plants. So we use a lot of energy to boil that water. And then we use a lot of water to cool those same power plants. Over 40% of our water use every day. This includes non-consumptive use. But over 40% of the water we use every day in the United States, it's more like 44, 45%, is just to cool those power plants. So a major fraction of our energy is going to make steam, and then a major fraction of our water is going to cool that steam. So it's very interconnected in that system. This means, by the way, we use more water for our light switches and light bulbs than through our taps and shower heads and that kind of thing. Because in our light bulbs and our lighting in our home or our electrical outlets, there's a power plant far away using water to cool it. So we don't see it. It's out of sight, out of mind, but we're using a lot of water there. All right, so we use a lot of water for energy. We also use a lot of energy for water, and we do that because the global hydraulic cycle, which is very powerful and there's plenty of water, it's mostly salty water. It's mostly out of reach. It's mostly far away, or it's the wrong time of year. It's 97.5% salt water, 2.5% fresh water, but that fresh water is mostly like in ice caps or somewhere else or deep below ground. It's not easily accessible surface water in the rivers. And so we spend energy to melt it or move it or drill for it or bring it to ourselves, and that's the challenge. So in many ways, this water cycle is an energy cycle because it indicates to us how far water is out of reach and how we have to use energy to get it within reach. We want water in a particular form, at a particular quality, at a particular place, at a particular time, and the timing issue is not relevant. There are some places like India that have plenty of water, but all comes in 1 month during the monsoons. And so they have to spend energy to store that water for the other 11 months. So this is a challenge as well, getting it to just where we want it. Well, this idea that water is just out of reach has been captured in our mythology, in our art, in our literature. It captures a sense of torture. There's a famous rhyme, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink, from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, 1798. A mariner out of ocean surrounded by water, but it's just out of reach because the salt water will kill you faster if you drink it than if you go without. And this is the same set of stories that talks about the albatross around your neck, by the way, the burden of decision-making out at sea, and water is a part of the decision-making they have to grapple with. So this is one idea of water. There's also the mythical Greek figure Tantalus, who was punished with eternal thirst and placed a pond of water, and every time he bent over to take a drink, the water would recede out of reach. So the word tantalize literally is from the idea that water is just out of reach. That's our language capturing this idea that water is far away. Even our mythology around unicorns, the magical, mystical unicorn and the hunts of the unicorn. You might have seen the unicorn tapestries in some of the cloisters or the Musée de Cluny or someplace like that, or maybe you've seen images in the books. This magical unicorn, where a lot of people don't realize, it's the unicorn's horn that's magic that makes water safe to drink. The unicorn could dip its horn into water, taking the poison out of it, and this tapestry shows the unicorn putting its horn into the water. The unicorn's horn is like magic. It takes poison out of water. Well, that's what energy does. Energy is magic. So energy is like that invisible unicorn. You can't see it, but you know it's real because our water is safe to drink. Or another thing we could do is just drink beer. This is a t-shirt of a waitress in North Carolina. In wine, there is wisdom. In beer, there is strength. In water, there is bacteria, which I think is funny, which reminds us of the importance of cleaning our water. Well, making beer and the fermentation process of making alcohol is one way to clean water. In fact, hundreds of years ago, making beer and mead and ale and port and that kind of thing was a water treatment process, and not a bad time to have a dinner as well, apparently. So this whole idea, there are many ways that we think about water and the way it shows up. Well, we use energy to get the water the way we want it. We use energy for pumping and conveyance and treating and heating and chilling and pressurizing, because we either got to move the people to the water or the water to the people. And if you're going to move water to people, it takes energy to do that. And if you want to clean it up like the unicorn's horn or bring it within reach, it's going to take energy. Well, in poor parts of the world, it's women who do that, maybe children as well, so women and children do that. It's often the woman's responsibility to fetch that water. The prototypical image of poverty in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia is a woman carrying water by hand or on her head or with a stick, moving it miles to get from the source to the home. It's laborious. Well, that poor sub-Saharan African woman or that poor Southeast Asian woman was an American woman 100 years ago. This is a poster from the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 1920, the farm woman's dream, and it was put out in the United States to encourage local farmers to get water systems by working with their county agents. And it shows a poor woman dressed in rags and a shawl, hands out holding water, no gloves, up a slippery, icy slope, having pumped it by hand. And her dream, curled up to the top of the ceiling, is this image of herself in a nice dress in the kitchen, water available at the turn of a valve, steam curling to the top of the image. That's the dream. That was us 100 years ago. We're not that far removed from the modern poverty we see elsewhere around the world, defined by the lack of access to water. So we can think about that. In the United States, we spend energy on water systems to liberate women and therefore liberate society. We could do the same thing in other parts of the world. Well, we've done it so much now in Western Europe and the United States that the chore of pumping water is now fun. So this is a picture of my boys, Maverick in the orange shirt and David in the blue shirt, at the old Botanical Garden in Munich, Germany this past June. And there's a water pump, and they're fighting over who gets to have a turn pumping water because they've never pumped water in their life. They think this is fun. They have no idea what a chore that was every day, day in and day out for a lot of people for millennia. So that's an example of what energy has done. It's liberated us from the tedious chores of getting water. Well, if you add it all up, all that energy for water, it ends up that water is responsible for more than 12% of our national energy consumption, more than 12%. This is about twice as much as lighting. We use more energy for water than for lighting, and a third of that energy for water is water heating, just to get the water hot. That means there's more energy consumed heating our water in our homes than Switzerland uses an entire year for all purposes. So these are big numbers, big enough to care about. So it invites this opportunity where we like this energy because it gives us the water we need and want, but it also sets up these vulnerabilities. So let's talk about those vulnerabilities or the strains. Let's take a global tour of strains in the energy-water nexus. Energy puts water quality at risk. There's a risk of coal chemical spills and slurry spills. There's radiation contamination risk from nuclear power plants. There's something called NORM, naturally occurring radioactive materials, which sounds very peaceful, but you really don't want it in your drinking water. Mining tails from extracting stuff out of the ground. Thermal pollution, where you should heat up or cool down the water, depending on what kind of energy process you're using. Biofuels runoff, oil spills, always in the news. If there's oil spill, the photographers go out to get a picture of the bird covered in oil, that kind of thing. And then chemical injection, that's hydraulic fracturing. So chemical injection has people's attention, especially up here, because it's a risk to water quality, and it is, but it's not the only energy form of the risk to water quality. There's a lot of it. The old anthracite mines here in Pennsylvania are also a collective risk. So that's one way there's strain, is that water quality is at risk from energy. There's also water quality issues. Here's a map of the U.S. shale basins around the United States, everywhere there's pink or purple, different basins, the Utica, Marcellus shales up here. In Texas, we have a lot of basins as well. And some of those basins overlap with areas of drought. There's a picture from a few years ago where a lot of the droughts in the West overlap with areas where there's shale production. So you have water scarcity at the same place you need water for hydraulic fracturing. So that's a strain in the system. And as a consequence, that water can be pretty expensive. If you're an oil producer, you might have to pay, 50 cents a barrel or something like that to get the water, and a couple dollars a barrel to move the water and inject it, then dispose of it. And those trucks are a nuisance because they tear up the roads and they create a lot of noise and kick up dust and sometimes kill people when they have accidents. So it's a real problem dealing with the water. And it's always been a problem. Water's always been expensive for oil and gas. Here's a story from a boomtown in a shale area. Many's the time you'd see a man come in, order a quart of whiskey, pour it in a bowl, and go to washing his face and hands with it. Damn good reason for that. Water had to be hauled miles, and it cost like blue blazing hell. It took many hundreds of barrels of water to drill a well those days, but water cost $3 a barrel. This is a boomtown talking about the expense of water for oil and gas from Cosmopolitan magazine in 1939. Now, you're probably wondering why I read Cosmo from the 30s, but sometimes you need updated fashion tips. So this is this idea that water is expensive or a problem for oil and gas is not new. We deal with it. And then you get all this wastewater you have to dispose of, and that wastewater can cause earthquakes when you inject it in different places, like in Oklahoma. The U.S. Geological Survey has talked about induced seismicity, a polite way of saying earthquakes caused by mankind. And that's usually associated with wastewater injection. But in today's news, in Lawrence County, just north of here, earthquakes linked to the fracking itself. So you inject water to fracture the shale, you produce oil and gas, then water comes out, and then you inject the wastewater. Usually it's the wastewater injection that causes an earthquake, but it might have been the fracking, in this case, the initial injection that caused earthquakes nearby. A local energy water nexus challenge for you. So something that you're going to have to grapple with as a society, kind of like we do in Texas and elsewhere. If you choose your sites thoughtfully, usually you don't get earthquakes. It's when you're getting kind of sloppy with it that you'll get earthquakes. So there's a way to handle that. All right, that's just sort of energy water for the liquid fuels. There's also dams, and dams impact the environment. Dams make the largest power plants in the world. The Three Gorges Dam in China, 22 gigawatts of power. That's like 22 nuclear power plants. It is a huge power plant, the biggest power plant in the world. The reservoir of water behind it is as long as England. That's how big the water is. And it displaced 1.3 million people. Some people actually estimate 4 million people, maybe they're not done. So millions of people displaced by this dam and the reservoir. Hundreds of earthquakes caused by all that mass of water and hundreds of landslides. And all that water, the mass of the water, billions of tons of water at a higher elevation, a couple hundred meters higher than normal, has actually tilted the Earth on the axis and slowed daily rotation of the Earth by 0.06 microseconds. If you are ever late for a meeting again, you can blame it on this. Say, well, Three Gorges Dam slowed the Earth, so my clock got messed up. So this is literally a world-changing kind of power plant. And if you're not careful, it can cause a zombie outbreak. So I don't know if any of you read World War Z by chance, by show of hands? Thank you for admitting it. I appreciate that. So in World War Z, the opening chapter takes place behind the Three Gorges Dam. Now, here's the background. The dam was built. It flooded a huge valley. A lot of people were displaced. One of the cities that was flooded was the city of Ghosts. This is real. This is all real. And the city of Ghosts is like 1,800 years old and is a shrine to the dead. That's real. And then in the story, a kid is swimming down to steal artifacts from it and a zombie bites him. That part might or might not be real. So that's where, but everything up, so it takes place there, and kind of this idea, this hubris that man has distorted nature so much or disrespected the dead that zombies will come back and walk the earth. So we got to be careful with our dams when we build them as well. That's not even the biggest under consideration. The biggest under consideration, well, that's the largest built, but there might be a bigger one in Congo along the Inga project called along the Congo River, which is the world's second largest by volume behind the Amazon. A $100 billion project to build a 40 gigawatt power plant, like twice as big as the Three Gorges Dam. And it's not all they built, a couple gigawatts to build, and they're trying to figure out whether to build or not. This is going to be a continent-changing power plant because if it's built at that scale, will provide 40% of the electricity for the continent. It's going to have a lot of downsides of displaced ecosystem and displaced people. Not as many people as, say, happened in China, but still a lot of people will lose their homes and their livelihoods. But it will bring light to dark and warmth to cold and electricity to a lot of places that would be really valuable for some people, and especially for the country. It will bring hard currency. Very controversial project. It's got all the good and bad of energy water nexus all tied up in one. So that's a challenge. The other challenge is these huge dams, they can collapse sometimes. You had one not too far away, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, 1889, a couple thousand people died, one of the greatest tragedies in American history. Santa Clarita, California, a couple hundred people died about 90 years ago. And then we're watching it real time right now in Oroville, California, the nation's tallest dam, where the spillway about to collapse. The dam itself probably won't collapse, but the spillway is at risk, where water's flowing over and eroding. It might come underneath the concrete, then the whole concrete wall will fall, and that's 30 feet or so. And that creates a wall of water going downhill. And they already have, it's like 160, 170,000 people have been evacuated and returned and might be evacuated again. That's happening right now. And it turns out that one of the response agencies is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency or Administration, that was set up by Carter because of a dam collapse. So dams collapsing is one of the emergencies we know that we have to manage. And here are some pictures of the erosion of the spillway that was built. This is the main spillway, but there's an emergency spillway beyond that, and some different images of that. That erosion can undermine the whole thing. Well, that puts people at risk, maybe a couple 100,000 people. Probably they'll get evacuated. Probably we're okay. But then you look at all the dams built in the Himalayas in China and India, like 600 dams proposed to be built with millions of people downstream. And this is a very seismically active region. Some people call them tofu construction, where they're being built into porous rock and things that move that are hard for a dam to stay still in. The Terry Dam in India alone would create a wall of water 200 meters high, like 600 feet high, moving, 30 miles per hour or something, with millions of people downstream. The Three Gorges Dam might create an even larger wall of water with 15 million people downstream. So there are disasters looming. This is the scary part of the talk, where we have to be careful, where this creates an energy water problem all at once. This is part of the energy water nexus strain. Well, we can also look at the power sector for the thermal power plants. I mentioned we use water for steam and the water to cool that steam, and that water's got to be just right. It can't be too hot, too cold, too abundant, or too cold. It's got to be Goldilocks water right in the middle there. And I'll give an example of each of those. In France, in 2003, there was a heat wave, a killer heat wave. It killed about 15,000 people in France and about 70,000 people across all of Europe. Anywhere there's a red dot on that map, it was 10 degrees Celsius, about 18 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than normal. And they do not have ubiquitous air conditioning in France the way we do in Texas. And so people are literally dying from the heat, especially the elderly. So there's a life or death situation in France, and they've got a nuclear fleet they're very proud of. They should be. It's very clean. It's been safe and reliable for many years, although they're having some troubles right now, it turns out. Well, the water they used to cool the power plants was hotter than normal because of the heat wave. The demand for power was hotter than normal because of the heat wave. People were turning on what air conditioners they had. So the demand was higher, but the supply of power was lower because they couldn't get the cooling they needed to run the power plants at full throttle. So the French government actually had to dial back the nuclear power fleet by about 15%. So this is a life or death situation. The water was too hot. That became a constraint on the power sector, and it couldn't provide the power they needed. Well, the water can also be too cold. A variety of examples of this. In Texas, we had a freeze in 2011. Now, the kind of freeze we have in Texas, you would laugh at, right? So a freeze in Texas meant it got below freezing for 30 hours in a row. And people are like, what do we do now? So we don't weatherize our power plant. Like here, you weatherize your power plant. So you build a power plant, and then you build a house around it to keep it warm. Well, we build a power plant, but don't put it inside a house because we're trying to keep it cold, not hot. And so when a freeze came through, it froze the water lines at a couple gigawatts of coal plants that tripped offline. When the coal plants tripped offline, it turned off the power to a lot of electric compressors for natural gas lines. The natural gas lines were already low in pressure because demand for gas was high because it was cold outside and we used gas for heating in Texas. So there's low pressure in the gas lines, and then the power goes out, turns off the electrically driven gas compressors that would put more gas in the lines, so the gas pressure fell even further. And then we had freeze-offs, which is where you produce oil and gas, water comes with the oil and gas, and froze at the surface, keeping the oil and gas from getting the pipes. And then we had, as a consequence, 50 to 60 natural gas plants that tried to come on to back up those two coal plants and couldn't. And then we had rotating blackouts, all because a couple of small pipes froze with water. So water can be too cold and the whole power system comes crashing down. Other challenges in the upper Midwest where you had Lake Superior frozen and barges delivering coal couldn't deliver, so they had to ship coal by truck. Shipping by truck's kind of funny. It's mixing metaphors, isn't it? They had to move coal by truck. So there are challenges with water being too cold. There are also the polar vortices in 2014 were an issue, where frozen lakes and rivers prevented the delivery of road salt. And because road salt couldn't be delivered, the roads were icy. And because the roads were icy, diesel trucks delivering propane couldn't deliver the propane. Because the propane couldn't be delivered, people literally froze to death in upper Wisconsin and places like that. So you have the situation where a frozen river in Ohio becomes an energy shortage in Wisconsin and that kind of thing. A multi-state energy water nexus challenge. Salt prices were tripling, propane prices were going up by a factor of 4, that kind of thing. All because depending on a water system that wasn't there when we needed it. All right, so water could be too hot, water can be too cold, it can also be too abundant, where you have floods threaten the power sector. This is the Calhoun Nuclear Power Plant in Nebraska. That's a flood there. It's hard to tell in the picture, but anywhere it's gray, that's water. And I'm not an expert because I'm a mechanical engineer, but I believe electricity and water does not mix. My electrical engineering friends tell me that. So they built inflatable berms about the height of this lectern around the power plant to keep the water out, and the water rose up to the top, almost went over, and then went back down. They were within 1 day of turning off that power plant because of too much water. The accident in Fukushima, it was really not the earthquake that was a problem, it was the tsunami. It was the water that was the problem. So having too much water can be a problem for a power plant. All right, so it can be too hot, it can be too cold, it can be too abundant. It can also be too scarce. Droughts are a problem for the power sector. I boldly wrote a New York Times op-ed July 24, 2012, where I predicted that the next blackout would be caused by drought. And then 1 week later to the day, the largest drought, largest blackout in the history of the world, 620 million people without power in India, triggered by drought. This happened in twofold. So there's a drought, and that means farmers are irrigating more than normal, and they're running electric pumps to move the water, so demand for power is higher. But because there's a drought, they're not getting much water out of the dam, so supply is lower, and then the whole thing's strained. Add in decades of underinvestments and bad governance and electricity theft, and the whole thing came crashing down, triggered by drought. Now, the timing was uncanny, because I predicted it a week before, right, and then it happened, and I was feeling pretty smart. It turns out I've been pitching that op-ed to New York Times for 4 years, and they just happened to run it that week. But I do give stock tips and other advice if you need it as well. Yeah. All right, so that drought's a problem in India. That drought's a problem elsewhere. Venezuela's facing that problem right now. They get a lot of their power from hydropower, and when the water levels are low, they get less electricity. Plus, they have low oil and gas prices, so they're broke, and they're having food riots. They have all sorts of challenges in Venezuela. Well, it got so bad that the water levels were so low, and hair dryers are so energy intensive, electricity intensive, the president of Venezuela went on TV urging women to let their hair go natural and not use hair dryers. And he's like, he said, it looks better natural anyway with you running your fingers through your naturally dried hair. So he gave these comments about this sort of national crisis about we don't have the power for hair dryers. And I tried to think about the United States and whether we want our president telling us how to style our hair. But I think if we're looking for what it takes to stop this, so by the way, here's what he looked like in Austin with a man bun, if you're wondering. So people be in the streets of pitchforks, right? This is we can't stand for that. I mean, everything else is fine, but that's just one step too far. So, real crises. In England, it's more civilized. It's tea kettles. It's not hair dryers. They have this situation in England where EastEnders, a soap opera, is so popular that they can predict to the minute when they'll have a surge of 1.75 million tea kettles plugged in, because the minute the show ends, people will turn on their tea kettle. And this creates a surge of around 3 gigawatts of demand. That's like 3 nuclear power plants of demand for like 3 to 5 minutes. So they have several nukes ready to go on standby just to meet the electrical surge to do the tea kettles right after the soap ends. And they're just very predictable and, way to go, Brits, right? You know when the surge is coming. At least they have the courtesy to warn you. So that's another strain on the system. And that's like water to cool the power plant to give you electricity to heat the water, right? So that's the water energy water nexus or something like that. And the hair dryers, water for electricity to take the water out of your hair, which is the water energy water nexus. So it's all combined and intertwined. Now, these constraints also go the other way. You can have an energy constraint become a water constraint. This is a boil water notice I got at my house in May 2011, and I've heard there's been some flush and boil notices here in the recent history as well. Due to a loss of water pressure from the power outage at the water plant in the Ridgewood Village water system, that's the water system my house uses, the water quality can be guaranteed, so we have a boil water notice until we get an update, that kind of thing. Well, for us, it's no big deal. Right? We turn on a knob to boil the water. We go to Safeway and buy some bottled water. That's not a big deal. But if you're that little girl in Africa, you're missing school to walk a couple miles to get the fuel wood or cow dung or straw that you're going to burn. You're walking back a couple miles. You're at risk of kidnap or assault along the way. Then you walk a couple miles to get the water, and you bring it back a couple miles. Then you boil that water using a primitive cook stove with that primitive fuel that puts out so much soot, smoke, and ash, it kills 2 to 4 million women and children prematurely every year. So for us, it's inconvenience, but for many people, it's a life or death situation. If we got them better energy, a more advanced fuel, a more advanced cook stove, or a better water system, then they would have that time to be in school, and they would have the clean water without dying from the soot. So for us, it's something to keep in mind. We're so used to the luxury, we can deal with it, but it's really a challenge in other parts of the world. All right, so we use energy for water, we use water for energy, there are strains in the system. Unfortunately, the trends apply to the strains will get worse. That will have water wars or a bunch of conflicts over water. Here they're like resource wars, water conflicts, that kind of thing. It's pretty depressing if you look too much at the titles. And that this idea that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over. Do you remember that story from Cosmo where he talked about men coming in and having whiskey to wash their face and the water's too precious, so you'd use whiskey for other things? So that same kind of idea, that water is a strategic resource. It's something over which we might have wars. Certainly Hollywood figured this out with Mad Max, right? So The Road Warrior, 1981, was all about fighting over oil. And then Mad Max Fury Road was all about fighting over water in 2015. And Hollywood's never been wrong on these things. So I look to them for guidance on this. And sure enough, they called it, right? The Syrian crisis, worsened by water scarcity, triggered in some ways by water scarcity. Droughts in the rural areas of Syria created a lot of bankrupt farmers who moved into cities, and then you have really high unemployment in cities combined with oppressive government and autocracy and things like that. So you have all these other bad things, but triggered by drought and influx of people that leads to a refugee crisis. The refugee crisis leads to election of Trump in the United States and Brexit in Britain and perhaps other geopolitical events in Europe. So these world events triggered by a drought in Syria, and today there remains water scarcity, millions of people affected, and it's going to be hard to have any peace or quality of life without that water there. India and Pakistan are at risk of going to war over water. All goes back to a 1960 treaty over the Indus River that was allocated in a way that creates frustration today, and it's tense, and the reason we care is because these are nuclear states, right? They can do nuclear threats to each other. And I love what Indian Prime Minister Modi said, blood and water cannot flow simultaneously. If the water flows, the blood doesn't flow, that kind of thing. If the blood's flowing, the water won't flow. So I think that captures some of that tension. And we have to care because these are large countries that we care about, and they are nuclear powers. So there's a lot of strains in the system. Now, the good news is there is a little optimism here. It's not all depressing. There's some good news. There's some solutions. That there are technical, social, and policy solutions. I'll go through just a handful, and I think you're going to hear a lot of solutions from the panel later because they're on the ground fixing things and doing things that are good for society. I'm here just to complain about it. So I don't have any solutions, but I can point out a few things. Wastewater is a resource. Actually, waste in general is a resource. We have all sorts of waste streams. And the way we manage our waste differentiates us as a society. There's a great book I recommend you read. It's called The Big Necessity, The Unmentionable World of Human Waste and Why It Matters, which is written by a British comedian, Rose George, who went around the world and watched people go to the bathroom, which is kind of funny, actually. It's a good bathroom book, actually, ironically. So it turns out we don't all go to the bathroom the same way. Like some people have latrines or dry compost or toilets that flush it away. So it's not as universal as you might think going to the bathroom, despite its fundamental role in our lives. And you can't help, by reading this book, come to the conclusion that countries that manage their waste are healthy and wealthy, and countries that don't manage their waste are sick and poor. Now, it's not clear if we're healthy and wealthy because we manage our waste, or we manage our waste because we're healthy and wealthy. So which one causes which is not obvious, but the correlation is really clear. And so we need to think about managing our waste streams. Well, one way to manage your waste stream is to use it as a resource, and don't call it waste. Just treat it again and use it. And you can do that. You can reclaim that wastewater, treat it to a drinking standard, use it again. That's one of the things. We call that toilet to tap. But it's kind of gross sounding, right? You take the toilet water and you treat it and you put it to the tap. Well, we don't want to do that. We don't mind putting it in the river and having the next city downstream do that, but we're not going to do that, right? So we don't want to close it with a pipe. Well, it turns out there are cities like Singapore where they get like 20% of their water this way. And it's fine. And the space station, the International Space Station, they do it because water is so expensive to lift to space. It's like $50,000 a pound to lift stuff to space, and a gallon of water weighs 8 pounds or something like that. So it's very expensive to lift fresh water to space. So they collect the water on the space station, treat it, and drink it. And I say, good enough for astronauts, good enough for me. So we can reclaim that water, use it again. There's other things you can do, showers to flowers, collect the gray water from a shower, put it out in your flower bed. You don't have to drink it, but you could use it for irrigation. Some places use gray water for snowmaking. Killington, Vermont does this. People call that where the effluent meets the affluent. So that's not very appealing sounding, but you can do it. And more and more places as snowmelt changes and snowpack changes that are using snowmaking to get there. And there's a lot of waste in the system. We could tackle the waste. We could reduce the waste. Natural gas system has leaks of about 1%. Water leaks and losses like 10 to 40% in typical municipalities. Electricity, more than half of the energy consumed for electricity is lost as waste heat. It'd be great to capture that waste heat. So we could plug the losses in the system with smarter sensors, more data, ubiquitous computing, that kind of thing, and more connectivity. Then we can reduce a lot of waste. That's an obvious place to start. Natural gas is outperforming the others because they have different risks associated with it. Natural gas leaks have explosive risks, and so tighter focus on safety has helped reduce that, but there's probably more to go. We can make our systems smarter, use more data. In general, our traditional conventional meters are pretty dumb. They don't tell you much information. A smarter meter might tell you your use by time of day or by function or by appliance or by person. If you have a kid taking showers that are too long or wasting energy by leaving lights on. And you could use that information to not only know what's happening and manage your losses, but then to actively manage your appliances. And when you have actively managed smart appliances, you can do other grid services or other energy and water system services. Here's one from The Economist in 2008. Fridges of the world unite, all the smart appliances. If you work together in tandem and you turn off the compressor in the refrigerator or the heating element in a dryer or something like that, you can actually prop up the grid and manage the frequency, stabilize the grid, leave it working. You wouldn't even notice. Like the heating element in your dryer might turn on off once every 5 minutes, but your clothes still get dry. And GE's created a whole fleet of technologies that could do this, that have grid services, for example. So we need to get more technology, more data, more information, more connectivity, and that's enabled by better solutions. And then we need to fix our markets. Our water prices are dysfunctional. This is from Buc-ee's. Anyone know what a Buc-ee's is? Anyone from Texas? Oh, you've been to a Buc-ee's. Okay, so Buc-ee's is like a huge truck stop with a lot bathroom stalls that go on forever and gasoline stalls that go on forever. And these are very popular in Texas. Well, I took this picture just a month or so ago at the Buc-ee's in Texas. A 20-ounce bottle of water costs $1.09. Well, that works out to $6.98 a gallon. At the same store was a 20-pound bag of ice for 99 cents, which is $0.38 a gallon. It's water wrapped in plastic. And the other one is water wrapped in plastic. But we pay a very different price. And so I think there's something dysfunctional about our markets when we can't get the prices of water right. There's also some policy solutions we think about. Kennedy brought this to our attention in the 60s. He made the very famous call for the space program where he said no single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important to the long-range exploration of space than to send a man to the moon and back before the decade is out. And none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. People forget a month before that, he made a clarion call for water. If we could ever competitively, at a cheap rate, get fresh water from salt water, that would be in the long-range interest of humanity and would really dwarf any other scientific accomplishment. Well, one call worked. We put a man on the moon, but the other one was ignored. In fact, we spent more money looking for water on the moon than we have on water R&D on Earth, which I think is sort of fascinating. So there's a chance there with our policy to invest in R&D or new technologies and membranes and treatment devices, that kind of thing. We have an opportunity there that's unmet or undermet. That's one. We could also think about educating ourselves. So this is a picture I took of a toilet in Texas that says, caution, reclaimed water, do not drink. It's telling you not to drink the toilet water because it's reclaimed. If we have to tell ourselves not to drink the water out of the toilet, then that is a reason for pessimism, that it might take a while to figure this out. I mean, there's a sink right there. You can drink the water out of the sink. All right, so what do we do while we're waiting? Well, we should educate people. We should improve energy and water literacy with better STEM education. So we're doing that right now. So working on an interactive energy water course app called Resourcefulness that is now public and available. It's based on the book and some of the concepts. The goal is to teach energy and water to K through 12 and industry and the public. And we've been working with a startup that helped make it and with Itron. So many thanks to Itron for their partnership, which with their partnership makes it available for free to school districts around the world. And we're starting to see adoptions at schools and different places. So that's one thing is we can make ourselves smarter. And if we're going to do that with energy literacy, we need to make it more beautiful. The earth without art is just I don't know if you've ever seen that. So it has to be beautiful. That STEM education needs to evolve to STEAM education. We need to have the A for art in there. We need to get people to be creative and thoughtful about this. And in addition to educating, we need to ramp up on conservation. We should start by eliminating waste. I go to The Onion for my news. Do you guys read The Onion? All right, so this story captured impoverished child in third world dreams about one day leaving light on for no reason, right? This is the dream. Some poor Bangladeshi kids, and that's like my kids, by the way. They leave their lights on all the time. We need to start by conservation, by tackling that. I got to hear Ban Ki-moon speak last April at a conference in a room like this size. It was great to hear him speak. And he said, use energy and water sparingly. Even a single drop of water is precious. And man, that captured it. Like, even a single drop of water is precious. And I think that's the right attitude, that conservation works. And conservation is one of the few solutions that works at every scale. It works at every spatial scale, and it works at every time scale. So we can have it work immediately with small scale by turning off the lights when we leave a room or adjusting the thermostat. That works immediately at small scale. We could do it at medium scale every decade when we buy a new car or a new appliance, get a more energy efficient one. We could reduce, reuse, recycle. And we could do it at large scale, at a continent scale or a regional scale with our cities and our planning and our layouts, and we choose what we do, what kind of power plants we build that last decades. So we can start conservation this minute, and we can make it last centuries if we do it the right way. We can do it in an area as big as what we occupy or span entire regions. So conservation is one of those few options that does that. And I think that's great. And conservation also will buy us time. So I'll close with this comment. This is a story with my daughter, Evelyn, who's now 17, but she said this when we were 7. We used to brush our teeth together, father-daughter ritual, and every night we'd brush our teeth together. And we'd get our toothbrush and put it under the water and turn the water on, and then turn the water off to brush our teeth, and then we'd turn the water back on to rinse the toothbrush. We would turn that water off while brushing, because that would save like a gallon or 2 of water, and you should do that if you don't do that. If you really want to save water, don't water your lawn. But it's also good to turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth. Well, one day, I didn't turn it off fast enough to her liking, and she got very angry, turned off the water, made a fist, and looked at me and said, "Turn off the water, Daddy. The scientists need time," in this like sort of dramatic, gripping voice. And first I was like, whose kid are you, right? But she really got it. So kids intuitively understand the role of being nice to Mother Nature and conservation. We beat it out of them the next couple of decades, but they get it early on. And she got it, and I love this, the scientists need time. Conservation buys us time. Conservation is not the only answer. It's not the ultimate answer. It's hard to light a light bulb with conservation. It's hard to drive to work on conservation. But man, does it buy us time. And we could use that time to bring in some more solutions. Thank you very much.